So Charles Spencer finally signed the one document that officially closes the book on an era, and honestly, the real story isn't the paperwork. It's the family fight that almost stopped him from picking up the pen in the first place. We're talking about the instrument of royal household closure, which sounds like the most boring legal term ever invented, but what it actually represents is the moment King Charles decided he was done operating in his mother's shadow. Even if it meant going head-to-head with Princess Anne in a confrontation that nearly shattered their relationship, the document itself dissolved Queen Elizabeth II's remaining household, retired the last appointments that were still technically working in her name, transferred sealed archives, and closed accounts that had been lingering in this weird administrative limbo since her death. But here's what makes this actually interesting. The order had been sitting on Charles Spencer's desk for months. He kept reviewing it, delaying it, sending it back unsigned. And the reason he couldn't bring himself to sign wasn't some complicated constitutional dilemma. It was one specific clause that transferred sole authority over sealed boxes of Elizabeth's private correspondence directly to him. Those boxes contained exchanges protected by officials who had served his mother, and opening them meant taking control of memories, warnings, and unfinished instructions that Elizabeth had never intended to become crown property. Camilla watched the whole thing unfold from close range. She had been pushing for one unified household, one clear chain of command, no lingering confusion about who actually held authority in the palace. But when she saw Charles Spencer staring at his mother's royal cipher on the document, she realized this wasn't about administration at all. He was grieving as a son, forced to close his mother's final door, and no amount of efficient palace management was going to make that easier. Before we get into the details of how this all exploded, make sure to subscribe to Crown Watch so you don't miss any updates on where the royal family goes from here. All right, let's break down what actually happened. The public announcement made this sound like routine constitutional housekeeping, closing old offices, transferring files, standard succession stuff. But for the people who had actually lived and worked under Elizabeth's authority, this felt like a second funeral. And the timing of how it all went down reveals something way messier than the official statements suggest. See, the crisis didn't start with Charles Spencer sitting at his desk hesitating over his signature. It started 6 weeks earlier at St. George's Chapel after a private memorial service when Charles asked for one final box from his mother's household to be transferred into his custody, and Princess Anne flat out refused, like not a diplomatic, let's discuss this later refusal, a quiet, direct, devastating no. She told him Elizabeth had ordered that specific archive remain sealed until all 4 of her children had been consulted. And that moment right there in that small reception room at Windsor became the point of no return. What makes this so fascinating is that Elizabeth's residual household had actually survived for a perfectly practical reason after her death. There were unfinished charitable commitments that still needed answers, ceremonial files that required protection, personal instructions that had to be separated from official crown material. Charles Spencer initially tolerated the arrangement because abandoning all that work mid-transition would have created chaos. But the problem emerged almost immediately. Senior officials started getting contradictory directions from the old office and the King's new team. Letters sat waiting for days without approval. Charities received uncertain answers. Protected records were moving through 2 competing chains of command. And Charles saw that confusion as a direct threat to his authority. Meanwhile, Anne believed impatience was being used to sweep aside promises their mother had made before she died. So when they faced each other in that reception room at Windsor, the sealed archive box sitting between them, both of them were already operating from completely different understandings of what was actually at stake. Anne rested one hand firmly on the box and refused to move. She told Charles Spencer that their mother's wishes couldn't be absorbed into administrative convenience. From her perspective, this archive was a family trust, not crown property that automatically passed to whoever happened to be sitting on the throne. But Charles heard something entirely different. He heard his sovereign authority being challenged inside his own household by someone invoking the authority of the previous monarch. And that's when he said the line that broke whatever restraint still existed between them: there cannot be 2 reigns inside one palace. Anne answered that protecting Elizabeth's instruction didn't create a second reign. It preserved a promise. Neither of them raised their voice, but the distance that opened up in that moment became impossible to close. The consequences hit fast. Within 48 hours, palace lawyers were drafting the instrument of royal household closure, and a documented revision shows that the decisive archive clause, the one giving Charles Spencer sole authority over those sealed boxes, was inserted only after the Windsor refusal. So what had started as a reorganization became something else entirely. It became a test of control, and the person who immediately understood how dangerous this was getting was William. He read the recorded summary of that confrontation and saw exactly what was unfolding. His father was defending the crown. His aunt was defending their family's word. The document being drafted would force both wounds into the same room, and someone was going to have to bleed. When Anne finally entered Charles Spencer's private sitting room for the confrontation everyone knew was coming, neither sibling arrived prepared to surrender. No aides stood between them. No private secretary softened the language. Charles remained beside his desk, while Anne walked in carrying a copy of their mother's last household instruction. She didn't sit down. He didn't offer an explanation. For several seconds, brother and sister just faced each other in this silence shaped by duty, grief, and decades of unspoken rivalry. Then she placed the paper in front of him and accused him of closing Elizabeth's door forever. Anne pressed her palm against the instruction and reminded him that Elizabeth's household was made of people, not machinery. Some of those staff members had served their mother through illness, national crisis, and the final days of her reign. They deserved a personal farewell. Instead, they were about to receive legal notices telling them their appointments had ended. Her voice trembled, but she refused to soften the accusation. And that's when Charles Spencer pushed his chair back and said something that reveals more about his state of mind than any official statement ever could. He told her that every single day of his reign, he'd been measured against a monarch no successor could replicate. Every delayed decision invited comparisons. Every disagreement encouraged officials to seek guidance from Elizabeth's remaining structure. He loved his mother, but preserving her shadow indefinitely was weakening his authority and leaving the monarchy trapped between two reigns. Then Anne opened the paper and pointed to one handwritten sentence. Elizabeth had specifically requested that private family correspondence remain under the shared supervision of her children. That instruction directly conflicted with a new document's sole authority clause, which would place every sealed box under Charles Spencer's control. His sister demanded to know whether he had ever actually seen those words, and the silence that followed broke him. Charles admitted he'd read the instruction weeks earlier, but argued it expressed a mother's personal preference, not a sovereign command capable of binding the next reign. To Anne, that distinction was convenient and cruel. Elizabeth had trusted her children collectively, and the king was now using constitutional power to reduce that trust to a suggestion. She folded the instruction, stepped away, and told him the final decision might belong to the monarch, but its consequences would belong to the entire family. Then she spoke William's name. The future king would remember whether his father had protected unity or demanded obedience at any cost. Charles Spencer watched her leave without calling her back. The argument ended behind a closed door, but the real struggle was already moving into the machinery of the crown, and the pressure came from every direction. Constitutional advisors wanted a clean transfer of authority. Financial officers wanted the final accounts closed. Camilla wanted her husband freed from an arrangement that kept him emotionally suspended between son and sovereign. William wanted clarity, yet feared the family cost. At the center of all that machinery stood Charles, listening as other people transformed his grief into clauses, deadlines, and signatures. William entered while the document remained unsigned, and what he said to his father reveals how carefully the Prince of Wales was navigating this. He told Charles Spencer that the monarchy couldn't build its future around unfinished mourning. Confused authority would eventually become public weakness. But then he asked his father to preserve Anne's custodial role over the family archive, arguing that trust could survive even when administrative power changed hands. Charles heard compassion in those words, but he also heard pressure. His son was no longer speaking only as family. The future king was judging how this decision might be remembered when another succession arrived. That realization unsettled him deeply. He started wondering whether William saw a grieving father trapped by history or a hesitant monarch refusing to command his own reign. A confidential legal opinion delivered that afternoon removed the final constitutional obstacle. The documented advice confirmed that Charles Spencer could claim the entire archive, regardless of Elizabeth's handwritten preference. The law supported the king completely. His family might not. Camilla found him reading the opinion alone and proposed a compromise: sign the closure order, assume formal custody, but create a private family panel allowing Anne and the other siblings supervised access to Elizabeth's personal correspondence. She believed this would protect his authority without breaking his mother's promise. Charles rejected the idea immediately. He warned that every exception would preserve another piece of the divided structure he was trying to end. Camilla didn't argue. She simply asked whether unity achieved through humiliation could truly strengthen the crown. and those words followed him after she left. Minutes before the signing appointment, Charles Spencer summoned the legal secretary and requested a second version of the final page. He dictated one unexpected concession involving Anne, the sealed boxes, and Elizabeth's private letters. The document would still end an era, but one altered paragraph would determine whether it also shattered the family. And honestly, the fact that he made this change alone, without telling anyone, without consulting advisors, after sitting by himself and rereading his mother's handwritten instruction, that's the detail that changes how you understand everything that happened next. The effects began before the ink had fully dried. Staff members who had carried Elizabeth's instructions through the final years of her life received sealed notices. Her household seal was removed from active use. Locked cabinets were cataloged for transfer. Anne learned that the signature was complete while standing beside her car, and for one exposed second, the famously controlled Princess Royal closed her eyes as though the ground beneath her had shifted. Change moved through the palace with ruthless speed. Final appointments expired. The late Queen's administrative office closed, and its remaining duties passed directly into Charles Spencer's household. Those appointments were official positions authorizing staff to act in the sovereign's name. Their expiration meant every unanswered letter, charitable promise, ceremonial request, and protected record now belonged to his reign. Palace officials issued another instruction before sunset. Elizabeth's royal cipher could remain on historic documents, gifts, buildings, and objects connected to her lifetime, but it could no longer authorize new correspondence or ceremonial orders. The emblem would survive as history. It would never again function as power. That distinction is what makes this closure impossible to dismiss as simple office reform. They weren't just reorganizing filing cabinets, they were formally ending the active authority of the Second Elizabethan age. Anne gripped the car door when William confirmed that Charles Spencer had signed. She asked whether her brother had adopted the original archive clause without alteration. The prince hesitated. That brief silence struck her harder than any answer could have. She feared Elizabeth's private letters had been placed entirely beyond her reach, that the family trust had finally been swallowed by the crown. William spoke before she could end the call, and what he revealed changes everything about how this story ends. His father had changed the final page. Charles would retain constitutional custody, meaning legal responsibility for protecting records connected to the sovereign's official duties, but Anne and her siblings would receive permanent access to the family correspondence their mother had intended them to share. Relief didn't erase the wound, but here's what makes the concession actually meaningful. A second provision guaranteed that Elizabeth's personal letters as a mother could never be used for royal publicity, palace strategy, or advantage in any family dispute. Charles Spencer had secured his authority while placing part of the archive beyond even his own political use. He created a space that the crown controlled but couldn't exploit. Anne heard the concession, yet she couldn't forget that he had acted without consulting her. The pattern was impossible to ignore. He kept making decisions about their shared inheritance alone, even when those decisions ultimately protected what she'd been fighting for. Camilla watched an old household nameplate being removed from its place. She'd wanted a single chain of command, but triumph never came. She understood that institutional success could resemble personal loss when history disappeared piece by piece. Charles Spencer had achieved clarity, yet stood surrounded by reminders of what that clarity had cost him. Anne finally released the car door and asked William to arrange one last private meeting with her brother. No officials, no lawyers, no documents between them. With the institution settled, the siblings were left to confront what no legal clause could resolve, the pain that had been building between them since that day at Windsor. That evening, Anne returned without the disputed instruction in her hand. Charles Spencer dismissed the final aid and closed the door himself. There was no Crown Counsel, no official record, no constitutional language to hide behind. She asked him one question: had he signed because the monarchy required it, or because living beside their mother's unfinished household had become unbearable? For the first time that day, the king answered not as sovereign, but as her brother. He remained silent before admitting both reasons were true. Charles told her that every unresolved file had become a judgment. Each unfinished instruction reminded him that Elizabeth had completed her duty while he was still struggling to define his own reign. Her authority had once steadied him. After her death, its lingering machinery made him feel like a temporary caretaker waiting for permission to become fully sovereign. Then his voice faltered. He admitted he delayed the signature repeatedly because dissolving the household felt like personally confirming that his mother would never return. As long as her officials continued answering letters and protecting instructions, some part of Elizabeth still seemed active within the palace. Signing the document meant ending that illusion with his own hand. Anne's anger began to weaken. She confessed that she defended the old structure for an equally private reason. Inside those remaining offices, she still felt like Elizabeth's daughter. Everywhere else, she was expected to serve the crown, support the new reign, and show no uncertainty. The archive preserved the final place where duty had not completely replaced family. Charles Spencer moved toward the desk and opened a small case. He revealed something no advisor had proposed. The permanent access clause was his own decision, made after sitting alone and rereading their mother's handwritten instruction. The law allowed him to ignore her preference. He had chosen not to. He removed the pen used to sign the order and placed it in Anne's hand. He asked her to keep it beside Elizabeth's private family papers. It wasn't a trophy. It was proof that although one sovereign had signed the ending, the family would carry its meaning together. The siblings emerged without embracing, yet something between them had shifted. William saw the pen in his aunt's hand and understood immediately. The prince knew the public announcement couldn't sound like bureaucratic closure. It had to explain why endings were necessary for continuity and why moving forward didn't require forgetting. By sunrise, the palace announcement moved across Britain with startling force. Broadcasters called it the formal end of the Second Elizabethan Age. Newspapers treated the signature as both constitutional housekeeping and national farewell. But one image captured the public mood more powerfully than any headline. Outside Buckingham Palace, an elderly woman placed a small bouquet beneath the gates, stepped back and whispered, "Now she is truly gone." The announcement confirmed what many had struggled to accept. Elizabeth's remaining household had been dissolved, its final appointments ended, and every act of responsibility transferred to Charles Spencer's authority. There could be no competing office acting in his mother's name. Palace officials stressed that closure didn't mean erasure. Historical stewardship meant protecting the records, traditions, and personal legacy of a previous sovereign without allowing them to control present decisions. Elizabeth's archives would remain protected. Her charitable work would continue through designated organizations. But constitutional authority, the legal power to act for the crown, now belonged completely and visibly to her son. William recorded a restrained public message from Windsor, honoring his grandmother's unmatched service while supporting his father's duty to govern without divided authority. His central words were carefully chosen. Memory must guide the monarchy, but it cannot become a second command structure. His expression remained controlled, yet emotion tightened his voice when he spoke about Elizabeth as the center of his childhood. Anne initially refused to contribute anything. She felt official language would flatten her mother's life into a polished statement. Then she remembered the pen Charles Spencer had placed in her hand and the confession he'd made without advisors present. She approved, one sentence, "Service is honored not by freezing time, but by carrying its values forward." Those words transformed resistance into quiet acceptance, and the fact that she chose them herself rather than letting palace communications craft something for her, that matters. One newspaper captured the national mood with brutal simplicity. Its front page showed an empty chair beneath Elizabeth's royal cipher, the personal emblem once used on her official papers. Above it appeared three words: "The final goodbye." Copies disappeared from newsstands within hours, and broadcasters repeatedly returned to the image as the defining symbol of the day. Outside Windsor Castle, silence gathered instead of anger. Hundreds arrived, carrying flowers, handwritten thanks, and faded photographs. Nobody celebrated. Nobody protested. The crowd turned an administrative announcement into an unexpected second national farewell, grieving not another death, but the final disappearance of Elizabeth's active presence from royal life. Charles Spencer studied the coverage alone. He understood that Britain had interpreted his document as an ending. Now he had to face his family and explain what kind of beginning that ending had purchased. He gathered Camilla, William, and Anne for a private family dinner after the announcement. No officials attended, no prepared statement waited on the table. The instrument of royal household closure had already been placed in the royal archives, the secure collection where historically important royal records are permanently preserved. Elizabeth's personal correspondence remained protected under the shared access provision, meaning her children could consult those letters while no single household could exploit them. Anne brought the signing pen with her. She placed it beside Elizabeth's handwritten instruction and listened as her brother spoke. Charles Spencer told her their mother's household had ended, but her standards had not. Duty, restraint, loyalty, and service could survive without keeping her offices alive. She finally accepted that distinction. Preserving Elizabeth's values didn't require pretending her reign was unfinished. William watched his father differently after that admission. The prince understood that every successor eventually faced the same painful test. Inheritance had to become responsibility, not untouchable memory. Charles hadn't rejected his mother's example. He'd accepted the burden of carrying it without hiding behind her authority. That decision gave his son a clearer lesson about leadership than any ceremonial speech could have offered. Camilla acknowledged the cost as well. She admitted during that private conversation that becoming part of the undisputed household of the reigning monarch brought heavier scrutiny, not effortless victory. No surviving office from Elizabeth's reign could absorb criticism or soften comparisons. From that night onward, every success and failure would belong directly to Charles Spencer, his wife, and the structure they had created together. The final concession proved something deeper about how this family operates when the cameras aren't watching. Charles had claimed the constitutional authority required to govern while preserving the private trust Elizabeth placed in her children, and remained a guardian of their mother's humanity. William inherited a monarchy with one clear command. Camilla accepted responsibility without the protection of divided power. Charles Spencer's signature didn't diminish Elizabeth's reign. It confirmed that her service was complete. The household she commanded, the appointments she granted, and the machinery that once moved beneath her authority could not remain suspended forever. By closing that structure, her son accepted the hardest truth of succession. Honoring the monarch who came before him required the courage to stop governing in her shadow and begin carrying her principles in his own name. The Elizabeth's influence had not been erased. Her reign moved from active machinery into history, memory, and inherited duty. Charles became sovereign without qualification, and his family stopped living between two competing eras. The last document closed Queen Elizabeth II's royal household, and in accepting that ending together, her family ensured that the values behind it would endure. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.